Roberts & Roberts Brokerage and Libertopia are pleased to present Uncle Scrooge, Free Market Anti-Quackitalist by Robert Anthony Peters, Alumni Advisory Board Member for the Foundation for Economic Education and Policy Advisor for the Heartland Institute.
Okay, well, thanks for coming by the talk. This one is, it's going to be somewhat related to one I just gave for a Bitcoin conference in Florida recently about why Uncle Scrooge would invest in Bitcoin, or at least speculate in Bitcoin, depending on how you want to define capital. And I was going to take a lot of that portion out, but I thought, no, you know what, I better leave. We've got some economics at the end, so at least you can say I didn't just talk about comic books for an hour. Speaking of, does anybody know, is this 45 minutes or 45 minutes? 45? Okay, all right, and I've already cut into it. Oh, great. So we got time. So you know, you just didn't just spend an hour talking about, or less than an hour talking about comic books. You've also got some rigorous economics in there. So hopefully it will be worth your while in entertainment value and intellectual component as well. I imagine we have some Uncle Scrooge or Donald Duck fans here. So, yeah? Okay, great. Yes, DuckTales is fantastic. We're going to watch a clip from DuckTales. So,
have you ever seen the Illuminati picture in DuckTales?
I did not, no.
Yeah, you can find it on the web. There's a picture where they spell "Ask Me About Illuminati" in the background of one of the DuckTales cartoons.
Really? Yeah. Well, I'm going to appreciate if you send me a link to that later, because I'd be curious to see that. Yeah. So, somewhat the history of the Uncle Scrooge. Uncle Scrooge was developed by one specific man. His name was Carl Barks. He was a cartoonist for Disney. He started out in animation and then moved to comic books. And so, largely, apologies. Apparently, I'm not updating frequently enough for Microsoft. Carl Barks started out as a cartoonist for Disney for the comedic shorts, animated shorts, and then moved into comic books, the physical books after that. But we're going to start off talking about him, the man behind the ducks, and what he did for them. Talk about some of the stories, some of the specific comics that I think have valuable or at least interesting lessons to explore. And then we're going to talk about money, what the qualities of money are, and consult about Uncle Scrooge's viewpoints on whether he would invest in Bitcoin or not. So Carl Barks, born in 1901 in Oregon to a family of ranchers up there, and they were descended both from, on his paternal side was Dutch and the maternal side was Scottish. So you have some of the hardiest business cultures. The Dutch certainly have been world-renowned for many centuries as extremely diligent traders, and of course the Scottish are known for their thrift as well. And I imagine some of the Uncle Scrooge characteristics come from some of that stock by which he came from. He was more of an introverted young man and grew up in a very remote area in Oregon. So he didn't play a lot. He engaged in his imagination quite a bit, and he would kind of doodle in the dust on a saddle, or other little things. He would take charcoal out of the fire and illustrate on the walls, which would get him punished, of course. He had a hearing problem. He was born with a bit of a hearing problem, which unfortunately got progressively worse over time, to the point where he had quit school when they'd moved around a bit. They moved to Santa Rosa, California. After they had the family had a patch of good luck up in Oregon, And then they moved to Santa Rosa, invested in some prune farms, and there were crop issues and a drought, and they ended up losing a lot of money. Went back to another rural spot in Oregon, and at that point they were too far from a school. He was about 5 miles from the nearest school, so he just dropped out altogether. He did a brief course, a brief mail order drawing course that his father encouraged him to do for, I think it was about 5 lessons or so, and then he stopped. And that was his only real training in illustrating. The rest was just by imitation, which is kind of fascinating because it's not something that we see as much of today. We have a lot of people going into formal programs or all sorts of, encouraged to create their own original content, which is of course always great. But most of whom we consider the old masters in art became old masters because they copied their old masters, the people who came before them. And it's not something that's encouraged now, but it certainly paid off for Karl Barks, though it was a bit of a long haul for him. He had many jobs. He was a rancher, a logger, a farmer, a swamper, a mule driver, a cowboy. He worked at a print shop for a while in San Francisco, and all the while was trying to get his original illustrations out there, his comics, but they just weren't quite selling. He worked for this was in the 30s, for a magazine called the Calgary Eye Opener. It was one of these kind of male-oriented joke papers, so a lot of illustrations of women with exaggerated features, or the henpecked husband to the brutish wife, and these kinds of amusing things that certainly, when Disney called, he was, I think, a little confused because that was not really his venue. But nevertheless, he had actually submitted because he was always good at drawing in the Disney style, close to that Disney style, and he took a major pay cut heading to Disney in California. He was living in, I think it was Minnesota at the time, or somewhere in the Midwest, upper Midwest. And he took about a half, his pay cut in half to start at Disney. But the magazine he had worked for kept changing hands, and it was a little unstable. He thought, well, it's a worthwhile risk. He started out as an in-betweener. It's what they call the guys who, they don't do the highlights of the action, but they do all those segments in between, drawing the movements in between the large reactions of Donald Duck in his case. And but what that required a lot of communication with other people in the office. And because he didn't hear so well, he was actually quite concerned that he was going to get fired. So he knew his comparative advantage actually was in creating gags, creating a lot of these kind of humorous moments. And so he put himself in a position where he began contributing those things, made himself very valuable, and so Disney pulled him from being an in-betweener to being in the writing department. And he stayed there for a while, grew dissatisfied with working at that studio. A number of reasons, just the wartime, the conditions had changed, and so he decided to try his hand at the comic books, and he went to Western Publishing, and that's kind of where, and that's really where his career and now his legacy began. So he started out with the Donald Duck comics, and during the course of that, developed this character of Uncle Scrooge, whose appeal grew and grew to the point where Uncle Scrooge eventually got his own comics and really, became an entity unto his own. One of the most popular. The Uncle Scrooge comics are the most successful and the most popular comics that Disney have ever produced, and they're all because of Karl Barks. Now, Karl Barks didn't draw all of them. In fact, he became known as the good duck artist. And so people, at this time, it was all Walt Disney's Donald Duck's Adventures or Donald Duck's Comics or Uncle Scrooge. And so it was kind of this assumption that Disney's just really busy, right? He's sitting there all day and all night illustrating all these things. The individual cartoonists were anonymous. So Karl Barks had no idea. He used to say he'd sit at a newspaper stand sometimes if he had free time, and he'd flip through like Popular Mechanics and like watch to see if anybody was going to buy, Donald Duck's comics. And he said, inevitably a kid would go and they'd buy, Casper or Bugs Bunny or something like that. He never saw anybody buy one of his comics, so he had no idea, if they were well received or any good. They never passed along fan mail at all. In fact, one piece of fan mail slipped through, and he was convinced that it was a joke. He thought it was, I forget, another cartoonist of a popular, I think it was the cartoonist of Dennis the Menace. He thought it was him pulling a prank on him because he was a prankster. And so he thought it was, the praise was so fulsome that it must be a joke. And he kept denying, it was a Hank Ketchum kept saying, it wasn't me. And then eventually he learned that, there's quite a fan base for him. Some fans had figured out who he was and tracked him down and visited him at his house. And we're talking about how awesome he was. And eventually, as time went on, his popularity increased. But he certainly, most of his career, he was creating these for himself. Essentially, he had no idea of his popularity. And there's different speculations as to why, the comic books, the publishing house didn't let these artists know. Some of it could have just been that they didn't want them to, that they could obviously leverage that position if they did a great job like he did. They really would get letters saying, this issue sucked, your last issue was really good. Why this disparity? And it was largely when either Karl Barks was doing it or somebody else. So extremely popular with the ones that he did. So now we'll talk about a few of these books, and we'll try to tease out some lessons that hopefully they should come pretty naturally. I mean, these were designed for children, but you can see why. In fact, in Europe, Karl Barks to this day, his comics are still extremely popular. They're reprinted there. The U.S. is finally, there's a company that's going to start reprinting the Disney comics, particularly the Uncle Scrooge and the Donald Ducks again. But it's kind of lapsed in popularity here. But it's still extremely popular in Europe. In fact, one of the second generation Uncle Scrooge illustrators, Don Rosa, who has the utmost respect for Karl Barks and tries to emulate him as much as possible. He's like a god when he goes over there. I mean, he's just amazingly popular, and the collections of any Uncle Scrooges are constantly in reprint there. But this one's one of my favorites. This was an earlier one because Barks stopped. He didn't continue with Donald Duck for very long after he started the Uncle Scrooges. So this one's Maharaja Donald is the name of it. Huey, Dewey, and Louie, of course, Donald's nephews, are over. Donald employs them to clean out the garage, and I'll go through my junk, and whatever I don't want, you can have. So they say, okay, well, this sounds like this could be a good deal. So they go through it, and Uncle Donald says, well, I think I'll hang on to this. I think I'll hang on to that. I'll hang on to this. And they're like, come on, you got to leave us something. So he said, well, I got this stub pencil. Here you go. You can have that. It's like the size of a golf pencil. And they're like, geez, wow, thanks a lot, pal. Real great deal. This is a lesson. Make sure you negotiate these terms ahead of time, right? But the real lesson is about to happen. They first think, well, we should just throw it away. The other two say, no, hang on to it. Maybe we can trade it for something better, right? It's something. So they're walking down the street. They say, hey, we got a pencil. We'll take anything for it. And their little pig friend says, well, I got a ball of string. Do you want that? So they say, sure, why not? Walking down the street, encounter guy flying a kite. String for the kite snaps. Boy, of course, at that time, he'd give anything for some string. Well, just so happens he's got a pocket knife on it. So they do the exchange, and one of the nephews says, making that kid fork over a knife was highway robbery. The other one say, don't let it bother you, he's happy. I mean, this is, right, of course, a mutual exchange of goods. Both parties are happier than they were beforehand. And then they continue trading up. The next panel, they trade for a belt buckle, silver belt buckle. After that, they trade for a pearl. They say, well, this is pretty good. You know, we started out with a stub pencil. We've got to the point where we've got a pearl. So let's go to the jewelry shop, see what we can get for it. So they go there. Just so happens, as coincidence would have it, there's a gentleman who's looking for a pearl of a certain size to fit in his wife's necklace. And he was already go to claim it himself. He had his ticket to go to his by steamship to India. But he sees this pearl and he says, this is great. Hey, in exchange for the pearl, I'll give you the ticket. This is a pretty good deal. They go to Donald and they say, check this out. We're going to India. And he says, no, you're not. This is only one ticket. There's 3 of you. Besides, you guys are kids. I'm going. So he takes the tickets, goes, as Donald, you know, it's kind of a brat does. Well, in their infinite level of resourcefulness, the young nephews go. They hide in a fruit basket and get placed on the ship. And thankfully that happens because Donald gets into some trouble over there. He ends up being locked into this prince's palace, and he's going to be fed to the royal tigers the next day. And they think, wow, we got to try to figure this out. How are we going to save him? We don't have any money. We don't know anybody. We don't have anything at all. What can we do? Donald's going to die. We got to do something. So they go outside. They get kicked outside. But they think, you know, how are we going to bribe the guards? We just can't do something. It's impossible. One of them makes a Kersnerian discovery on the street there. Yes, we can. Look, there's an old stub of a pencil. So, you know, it's this beautiful, this entrepreneurial moment where, you know, the discovery of some sort of resource that this can be applied, this can be traded. You can acquire gains from that exchange process. And they already experienced this earlier in the story. So they know that, hey, as long as you have some resources, you're good to go. There was, this was a class that a Stanford professor taught where I guess each of the groups in this business class had, they had X amount of money, like $300 that they could spend, and whoever created the most value at the end of this project would win some sort of grand prize. And they had a 3-minute presentation that they would give at the end of it to talk ostensibly about what the results of their project were. Well, one of the groups took that time for the presentation and sold it to a business recruiter, and so they were the ones who ended up winning. They garnered the most amount of money. And it's fascinating, just these things that we take for granted, right? These resources that we have access to that we may not see value, but it takes a real entrepreneurial mindset to discover that value can lie anywhere, whether it be time or some sort of, a stub pencil. To me, this is a great example of some of the economic lessons that Karl Barks had in his material. So let's see. This one is adorable. Micro ducks from outer space. Scrooge encounters this tiny flying saucer. And he first is trying to swat it. He thinks it's a bug. He thinks it's a toy. And then he discovers there's these tiny little guys who beg him, "Don't mistrust us, sir. We've come from the far-out planet Micro to seek trade with Earthmen." And then nothing gets Uncle Scrooge Twitter-pated quite like trade. Trade? Did I hear you say trade? You mean buy things? Yes, that's right, sir. Let me introduce myself. I'm Scrooge McDuck. Manufacturer, shipper, retailer, financier, bill collector, anything in trade, I'm it. He's always up for every opportunity that can come his way. Any profit developing experience? Well, they are here to buy some food. They've had a drought. They've had some poor conditions on their planet. And they are looking for some wheat and corn. Well, he had some samples delivered earlier in this comic into his safe in his office. He had some extras, and so he thinks, great, yeah, I've got tons I can sell you. Well, they really only want 3 kernels of each, but they're hoping he's not going to be insulted. He says, certainly not. Glad to sell you any amount. 3 kernels would be an umpteenth part of a gram. Then he wants to know what they use for money. Gold. We hope there's enough in this sack. Now, isn't that the cutest stuff? Gold coins no bigger than one of my tips. 2 of these coins will pay for your grain, gents. You get the rest of the sack back in change. Well, this is a pleasant surprise, Captain. We thought from listening to radio and TV that all Earthmen are crooks and monsters. And again, I mean, this is something clearly that hasn't changed, right? I mean, businessmen are always portrayed. Yeah, exactly. Whether it's in the news media or the entertainment media. And sometimes it's true. It's not as if they're not human. You know, they are subject to flaws and failures. But to me, it's really refreshing that you see Karl Barks is portraying, somebody who's considered the greediest man in the world, the richest man in the world, potential to be obviously the greediest man in the world. But he's engaging in this fair exchange with them. Listen, this is how much it is. And oh yeah, you gave me too much. I'm just going to take this and I'll give you the rest back. I mean, clearly he's got superiority of power, of size, of position, of status, all these things. But it's wonderful to see a piece where, yeah, the man who has the potential to be the greediest and to take advantage of that is also engaging in fair exchange. What's that?
You're tiny duck, you do not.
Yeah.
Okay. Both parties are happy.
Exactly. Yeah, and again, you have that mutual beneficial exchange that Karl Barks displays quite often. This is a great one that deals with money and money in a society. So Uncle Scrooge, he just gets sick of dealing with everybody asking him for money all the time. Always bothering him, always hassling him. He's kind of lost it. So he sees a therapist at the end of it, and the therapist says, "Hey, go to this town of Tra-la-la. There are this not a town, a country of Tra-la-la somewhere in the remote." It's supposed to be like an Asian hinterland location, high up in the mountains, and they don't
spin on Shangri-La.
Yeah, exactly. And Karl Barks is great because he loved to set things in these exotic locales where he would play with those notions of the idyllic utopia, the Shangri-Las, and and of course all of his kind of words and names were spin-offs that were not too far from what he wanted you to get from it. So they head there to this land where they don't have money, and Uncle Scrooge thinks, oh, this is it. This is great, because he's totally had it with all that. And so the ruler says, we Tra-la-Lalians have never known greed. Friendship is the thing we value most. And this is a socialist paradise, right? I mean, this is utopia. This is great. I mean, if this were true, why not? Sure. And they go on and talk about how, nobody's asked us for a single favor. Everybody shares. It's wonderful. Nobody's trying to chisel them out of money. So get down towards the bottom of the page. Life in Tra-la-la is indeed ideal until one day one of the locals finds out, what is this thing? Well, when they were flying into Tra-la-la, Uncle Scrooge and Donald and the nephews, he let loose a bottle cap out the window. And it was discovered by one of the Tra-la-Lalian citizens. And he says, oh, well, this is probably Scrooge's. I'll bring it back to him. He brings it back to Scrooge and says, I don't want that. That's worthless. It's a bottle cap. I have no need for it. You keep it. So then he gets a little excited. This is kind of cool. Goes around and shows his friends and says, hey, take a look at this, what Scrooge gave me. Oh, man, you are lucky. Boy. And then all of a sudden the interest develops. I wish I could have one. Hey, I'll give you a sheep for it. Hey, I'll give you 2 sheep. And the wife says, hold out for more, right? Finally, a guy says, I'll give you 10 sheep. The guy says, great, 10 sheep, I'll take it. And somebody talks to him, 10 sheep, I'll give you 20 for it. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And this is one of these, the way Scrooge resolves it is he calls his pilot to ship in tons of bottle caps and just litter them with bottle caps. So, kind of almost one of these Ben Bernanke helicopter moments, which we'll see teased out even more in the next column. But it's this notion of, that these things are inherent to human nature, right? We want certain things, and that these idyllic ideas of a place without scarcity, it's the human condition. Scarcity is inevitable. You'll always have scarcity of one sort or another, even with the possibilities of 3D printing. Were you going to bring that up?
Yeah, there's an old movie. The setting is after the gods must be crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
About that. So he throws a Coke bottle out of the plane.
Exactly.
After a while, the village gets kind of crazy around.
Yeah, yeah. And, and even with the possibilities of 3D printing that I think may do amazing things about scarcity, but we still have the scarcity of time, right? I mean, there's always going to be some aspect of our lives where there is some scarcity, and we're going to value that and be covetous of it, as I think, we should. And then, of course, you see the effects of hyperinflation of a bottle cap economy by the end of it. But this is, I think, the most wonderful economics lesson here. It's called the financial fable. So Donald and the nephews they all work on Uncle Scrooge's farm. Donald, of course, resents this notion of having to work. It's rather unpleasant, as I'm sure many of us feel on occasion. But the nephews say, hey, if you want stuff, you got to work for it, right? If you want a warm wool sweater, you gotta get the wool. You want eggs, you gotta work to get the eggs. Uncle Scrooge reprimands Donald, tells him to get to work. Of course, Donald's not having it, not thrilled. And meanwhile, Uncle Scrooge is investigating. He's got a new plan. Instead of having a very conspicuous money bin, he's got a big corn crib that he's filled his money in. He thinks, nobody's going to think to look at here. It's in the back of my property. I've got all my money there. It's great. Plus, it's a different environment. He gets to swim out in the sun. It's a real pleasant spot. Back to Donald. He runs into his lucky cousin Gladstone, who doesn't work, but always just winds up lucking into everything in life. So Donald's he convinces Donald, hey, don't be a sucker, don't be working. And Donald says, hey, I'm gonna chill out with you. Hopefully, he can free ride off of some of Gladstone's luck. Meanwhile, Storm moves in, right near where the corn crib full of his money is. Takes that money, whips it up into the sky, in true helicopter Ben style, and disperses it all among the population. Uncle Scrooge, the nephews are like, holy crap, this is terrifying. You've just lost your entire fortune. Uncle Scrooge, oddly, is very calm and relaxed. He says, so what? If I stay here and tend to my beans and pumpkins, I'll get it all back. All right. The guy's very confident. Normally, he freaks out in a lot of other comics about losing a dime, but you lose your entire fortune, he's relaxed. Yeah, big deal. So, but it's all in service of a good story. So, as luck would have it, Gladstone's luck continues. $1 million drops into his hat right there. Donald thinks, this is great. we're gonna chill out. We're gonna do what the rest of the world does in these panels. Is, I guess this was a phrase at the time. This was written, "Gone to see the world." So, you know, you just pack up, quit your job, head out, go on a permanent vacation, have a good time. Well, they encounter that they can't have any goods or services. Nobody's operating anything anymore. You know, they can't fill up with gas. They can't get food. Nobody's working, right? Everybody has $1 million. Nobody has to work. The confusion of wealth with money. Meanwhile, Scrooge knows what's on the horizon, so he starts arming the nephews to protect the food that they've grown, which is wonderful. You know, we've got to keep an eye on our private property here. Well, Donald and Gladstone Gander come back. They're a little dejected, a little hungry. And so is the rest of the population. Well, hey, you know, Uncle Scrooge says, Donald, you know, you can have your job back, but if you want breakfast, the eggs are $1 million a piece. Yeah. Cabbage is $2 million. Peck of corn is 3. Ounce of wool is 4. Ham, I think, is a little overpriced at $1 billion, but you know, it's his ham. He can sell it, you know, for whatever it is. So eventually, Uncle Scrooge gets all his money back, and things are again as they were. And you know, this to me is one of his finest, because it really teaches you concepts about the notion of inflation, the prospects of what happens with just raw redistribution of wealth that doesn't occur through the market. I'm sorry? That's a great question. You know, I don't remember. I want to say 46. No, I think it's later than 46. It must have been in the 50s. Yeah, no, it was definitely in the 50s. 50s or early 60s. Yeah, and he made a remark that he said, you know, if the Russians ever come over here, I am surely going to be sentenced, you know, for this comic alone. Yeah, because of the ideas about redistribution, and I think it's a truly lovely comic. We are running out of time. Is there another session at noon?
No, actually you're good.
Noon. Okay, so I'm just going to keep going a little bit, and if you need to leave or something right at the end, you can always ask me questions anytime. I'm here today and tomorrow. But I know we started a little bit late, and and nobody's obligated to stay, but I'm hoping you will indulge. Let me open the. Sorry, I did not have the volume on, so I want to be sure and get that.
You know what's really funny about that whole DuckTales
This
episode?
one?
Yeah. Is they're actually, rather than inflating the currency, they're doubling the collateral. Like, if you see, is that the one you were looking at? I just walked in the end of it. But I've seen this before, where they basically get a wish, and they get the younger, the grandsons of Scrooge McDuck,
The nephews,
the nephews. They get to keep, repeating, doubling their silver and their gold every single time, and then everybody's got, all the silver and gold.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's like currency was the point. Like, they can inflate away the currency, but the collateral, which was the silver and gold, which was the exchangeable collateral for notes of trade.
Mm-hmm.
Those weren't being created in this example. So it was like kind of weird to me when I was watching it. Like, and I watched a couple overviews on it where they're actually saying what's inflating away is more gold and more silver is inflating away your purchasing power. Versus
which would occur though. I mean, if you doubled the gold supply, yeah. So the same effect, but it's it should serve as an allegory for what they're doing with paper.
Right.
Yeah.
You need volume there?
Yeah, I'll have it coming out of here. Do you want me to? You can do great.
Are these located somewhere? Just do a search on DuckTales?
Yeah, you'd be able to find this very easily online.
These are awesome. It's also the virtue of capitalism, though, because he's a successful businessman who can just really make his money. Also, I mean, you really have to look at it for if you're a true, he's a visionary who's growing food.
Right,
and
right.
knows he will make his money back, just like really
Oh yeah, yeah.
successful,
In the
wealthy
financial
people
fable one.
feel, you know, really truly successful people will lose and win again.
Yeah.
And lose again and win, and so they have that ability.
Yeah.
One thing that Steph Central was really interesting because somebody in real life actually did that. They went on Craigslist and they took something like a paperclip or something and they just kept trading it and trading it.
Oh, nice.
And they eventually got
Oh, that's a cool story. Yeah, yeah. That's great. That'd be a little time consuming. I would imagine.
Oh, that's awesome.
Somebody
Yeah.
did it.
And I'm not a good salesman. I probably wouldn't get that far, but that's really cool. Yeah. Are we good with the?
Just go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Great. Okay. So this is a little clip here.
Even a video version of Uncle Scrooge is too smart for the Beagle Boys. Let's play again. Uh-oh, I'm broke. I'm busted. Bubblegum. I'm sticky. Jeepers. It's only the first day of summer vacation and we already spent our whole allowance. Uncle Scrooge, can we have a raise in our allowance?
Boys, I've told you before, if I raise your allowance, you'll grow up to have no respect for money, learn to live a wasteful life, and end up out in the street begging for a few measly coins. And then who'll take care of you?
Oh, I will. I'll be out there, too.
You boys have to learn that you can never get something for nothing.
But Uncle Scrooge!
$1 on condition that you go away and never help me clean again.
It's a teacher's day dinner! Yipes! Do you see what I see? Yeah, but I see two of them.
You boys have stumbled upon my latest invention, the multiphonic duplicator.
The what's a duplicate? Who's it? Is it some kind of plant grower?
Oh, no, it's a machine that can duplicate anything.
Anything? Will it work on this?
Sure. Watch. This machine works on the principle of molecular restructuring by audio disruption.
Wow. Now that's what I call a double your money back guarantee. Let her rip.
I can't believe that crackpot finally hit the jackpot. Do you mind if I borrow this doohickey for a little while?
Okay, but be real careful with it.
Oh, I'll treat it like it was worth $1 million.
Hey, look, it duplicated all by itself.
Abracadabra! Eat your heart out, Ducky.
Boggle me money bin.
Amazing, huh? This little baby of gyros can double your whole fortune as easily as this change purse.
That's exactly what I'm afraid of.
Say what?
Easy money. I didn't trust any dollar I haven't earned.
But Mr. McDuck...
Interesting phenomenon. It seems the sound waves of any bell causes the duplicates to duplicate.
Spending it.
Oh, no. Don't tell me you boys have been spending duplicated money.
Sure. What's wrong with that?
If it keeps duplicating, it could ruin the economy.
How do you figure?
Yeah. What's wrong with having lots of money? You do.
Don't you see? If everyone has it, it loses value. Prices will go up, then everyone will have to have more and more money. It'll be chaos.
Don't worry, Mr. McDuck. I'm sure there's still time to collect all the funny money before it really spreads. But don't quote me on that.
Extra, cash, avalanche, berries, duckburg. Prices going haywire. Read all about it. Only $200 an issue. Extra.
Wipe your shoes, kids. I don't want you bringing more money in the house again.
That'll be $5,000.
$10,000, please. Exact change only.
2 cavities. That'll be $40,000 per filling.
Well, at least some prices haven't gone up.
Well, this, Karl Barks didn't, he wasn't directly related to DuckTales. This was a production that went on after, he had gotten out of comics altogether. But of course, all these characters were ones he inspired, including Gyro Gearloose, the inventor. But it's great to see that some of his messaging continued forth throughout, even that series. And DuckTales could be a whole other lecture on. It created a real renaissance in children's programming at the time, especially for school day afternoons, which were amazing. And I think that's probably enough. We could continue talking about money, getting back to that, but I think we've probably hit enough stuff. Unless anybody's dying to know, I would just recommend reading The Mystery of Banking. It's very short, and then I went through the qualities in a prior lecture of what makes money, at least according to Rothbard, and then how Bitcoin fits the majority of that those qualifications, and which is why Uncle Scrooge, the big disadvantage is he can't swim in Bitcoin. The pros are that, yes, sir.
I was having a talk, and I mean, I own a couple Bitcoins, and I like honest currency. So I was having a conversation with these guys that were trying to back another cryptocurrency with compost, and they actually monetized I think it was like a $9 million pile of compost, and they're like, the compost can back it, and I was like, well, it's not really a finite resource, and they're like, but it's not a bad thing if we have tons of compost to grow more food. And so then we were talking about Bitcoin and whatnot. And so one of the things with Bitcoin especially is when they seized the guys from Pirate Bay's coins, they moved in and started dumping those. They came in and bought it up to an overbought position, and then they sold it. So when somebody has an infinite printing press, right now, you buy Bitcoins for dollars. So if they can create as many dollars as they want, they can essentially buy all your Bitcoins and then sell them all. And if they lose $200 million, $500 million, $1 billion, do they care? No, they don't. They're eliminating competition. So, I mean, that was a pretty interesting question that, we were trying to look at.
Yeah, well, Bitcoin is scarce, so they can't, you can't.
But you buy it for dollars, which they have infinite of.
Right. So its relation to the dollar is constantly going to shift.
Sure,
right, unless you start relating things to Bitcoin. It's going to be this much Bitcoin regardless of what the dollar amount is.
Right, exactly.
And we choose amongst us in our community, there's going to be X amount of Bitcoin. Finished.
Because everything is priced.
And I trade other cryptocurrencies against Bitcoin.
Yeah, and everything essentially is priced in relation to everything else. I mean, you can figure out how many chickens for a skateboard, but it's a much more complex system to determine that. It's much simpler when you have a single or a few medium of exchanges.
Well, it's as high frequency trading is done. I mean, they basically manipulate markets by selling things that they don't have, and they can do that by using margin accounts. And so essentially, with their banking rules, they were looking at making Bitcoins illegal, right? But if you got these big trading houses that have 40,000, 50,000 Bitcoins, then they can add leverage to it if it's legal, and then they can trade and sell things they don't have. I know you can't really do that with Bitcoins because you actually have to have a physical number of Bitcoins. But they can come in and have those 40,000, wait till it's overbought, and then sell it at 1,200, and all of a sudden the price goes down to 300 because they're dumping 40,000 as everybody else is selling. And then they just buy back. Now they're buying again, so they'll own 100,000 or 200,000 again. I mean, this is just how banks play with commodity paper.
Yep. Isn't that how the whole market works, though? Is anybody with the majority of the share gets to control the price?
Well, I mean, there's not free markets. I mean, that's obvious. There's not free markets.
But if you want to talk about money specifically, Mr. Dorn can probably tell you about the Hunt brothers back. Was that in the 70s? The guys that tried to corner the silver market, and it's a very challenging thing to do.
Well, they didn't end up competition. You can't corner a free market because the price of things go up. So, you know, that was fraud by the Fed.
Right. So, there's a few qualities that Bitcoin is superior to a physical currency for, and so, you know, I think Uncle Scrooge would definitely diversify enough to participate in that. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm just going to plug Peter Boss's talk later because he's talking about Amsterdam, and Karl Barks, the cartoonist, the creator of Uncle Scrooge, he came from some Dutch ancestry, and I think some of those good trading influences influenced his comics. So I would definitely I'm going to go and listen to Peter Boss's talk on Free Amsterdam. Is it in this room? In this room at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock? 3 o'clock. So I hope you'll go. So if there's any other questions, I know we've got, we may be over time or we've got some extra time, but anything else anybody want to bring up? No?
Well, thank you.
Thank you guys. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for watching this presentation. Visit Roberts & Roberts online at rrbi.co for all your precious metals needs. Roberts & Roberts not only accepts Bitcoin, they prefer it. If you enjoyed this video, also consider donating to Red Pill Productions.